recently, the Jehovah's Witnesses celebrated the Lord's evening meal. So in this presentation, we will critically examine their 144,000 teaching. Based on the facts presented in this video, you should be able to discover whether or not the 144,000 is a literal number or whether or not Charles Taze Russell was a fraud.
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
You've probably heard Jehovah's Witnesses teach that there are only 144,000 seats reserved in heaven. That's their number, not ours. And once you do the math, and I mean really do the math, you're going to see real quick the numbers just don't add up. In an earlier video, we sat down with Daniel to talk about the 144,000 teaching, and specifically how the numbers simply don't add up. In this condensed version, I'm going to walk you through how fast those seats actually ran out, and why the Watchtower had to scramble and come up with a second group. We'll keep it nice and simple, and if you want the full deep dive on this topic we did a few years back, we'll drop a link in the full-length video in the description.
Let's talk about who's going to heaven,
That's
who's
right.
not.
That's right. That's right.
Let's first of all start with the biblical teaching about the 144,000. Where in the Bible does that come from? And then let's talk about its application.
Yes, it's very important. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses, they take the book of Revelation, and from the book of Revelation is where they pull this number, 144,000, as a literal number of how many people are going to heaven.
And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, sealed out of every tribe of the sons of Israel.
Got it. Now, the book of Revelation, as we know, is a symbolic book.
Very much so.
Can you talk to us about symbolism and then literalism?
Yeah. Well, when you really have this conversation in depth, with even among witnesses, they will oftentimes acknowledge it's just kind of hard to grasp. And the reason why is because of what you have to do to get the teaching to work. You can take any Jehovah's Witness, take any Jehovah's you want to, have them opening up the Bible. And I've done this many times. Have them open up the Bible. And after they'll show you where the scripture is. They'll show you, they'll take you right there, 144,000. And then you say, well, let's take a look for something. And you take them back to Revelation chapter 1. And you ask them, so from Revelation chapter 1 all the way to this number 144,000, is all this literal or is it symbolic?
Symbolic.
Then when you hit the number, literal. Now you pick up and it becomes what?
Symbolic.
Symbolic again. And so just coming out the gate, when you start thinking critically about this teaching, you see that there is a lot of holes. I mean, the wheels literally begin to fall off the wagon, especially when you look at how they set it up. The teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses is that the 144,000 starts in the first century. So from the time that Jesus was on the earth, he died, Pentecost, from there going forward, every person, this is their teaching now, every person who was baptized got a seat. Got a seat
where?
Got a seat in heaven.
Got a seat in heaven. Okay, so we're going to go with the literal 144,000. And then literally, this goes back to first century.
It's back to the first. We're talking 2,000 years.
Okay, so JT, talk to me about the literal 144,000 and the math. It just doesn't seem to add up.
Yeah, you run into a problem when you start doing the math and what the society has actually said in many cases. As a result, many times they have to back up because they realize they made a wrong statement. We making the same mistake. We can't do this. I'll give you an example. The society teaches that from the first century all the way to the 20th century, only 144,000 people are going to be selected in this window. So here we are today, in the 21st century, and this is with the number we're working with. We start back at the very beginning. And if you sit down and you start doing the math, you're like, this don't make any sense. And that's the reason why. We take, for example, the first people who got their seats.
Seats in heaven.
They got their first people.
Got their reservation.
They got their reservation. They got a seat in heaven. So let's do the math then. We start with 144,000. That's how many seats there are in heaven for people, according to the Watchtower Society. The first people to get their seats were those at Pentecost, 120. So we subtract 120 from 144,000. That now leaves us with 143,880 seats that's available for those who will be going to heaven. The Bible tells us in the book of Acts that 3,000 more souls were added. So we now subtract 3,000 more seats. That leaves us with 140,880 seats that are available for people to be called to heaven according to the Watchtower Society. The Bible then tells us that 5,000 men were added in Acts chapter 4, verse 4. Now, is that just men only, or they're also women? Well, it's often debated among Bible scholars, but we'll give the society the lower number. Just 5,000 seats were taken away. That now leaves us with 135,880 seats. Yes, that's all the slots that are available in heaven. Now, according to the Watchtower, in the year 1935, there were 52,465 people who said they were going to heaven. The Watchtower says, well, that's not true. That number is not accurate. It wasn't that many people going to heaven, not 52,465. So we'll give the society a 25% margin of error. That means then that 13,116 people were basically bogus anointed people. That means you're looking at about 39,349 individuals who were going to get a seat in heaven. Now, this is in 1935. Now, we look back at where we started. How many seats did we have that were available? We had 135,880 seats available for those going to heaven. And in 1935, we're looking at about 39,349 seats that would be taken up. That leaves us with a total of how many seats left for 19 centuries that are going to be taken up by this group from 1935. That now leaves us how many seats available? Well, we go back to our number of 135,880 based on the book of Acts. And now we're going to take away 39,349. We're looking at about 96,531 seats that are now available. Now, this is the question, the critical thinking question, that a Bible study should pose to Jehovah's Witnesses. Are you saying that for 19 centuries, almost 2,000 years, that Jesus Christ only had just over 90,000 people who became his servants? That would average out to roughly about 50 people a year. Each year, only 50 people throughout the entire earth decided, I want to be a Christian. This is what the Watchtower Society is trying to tell you. This is why we say when you start running the numbers make no sense whatsoever. And this was the reason the society realized they had to come up with a secondary group in the early 30s. Any first-year statistics student could look at the number of people who were partaking. And why was that so important? Well, the Watchtower taught that every person who got baptized, they had them a seat guaranteed in heaven, and the seats were running out. Now think about this, that the vast majority of the anointed in our modern day, they come from Western countries. In fact, good old USA leads the number of people who are slated to go to heaven. Unfortunately, if you're from Africa, Latin America, or the Asian Pacific, there are not too many seats for you. Now this time, we're going to use the math calculations of secular history of historical record that the Watchtower used. And notice what happens to the number of seats. We start with 144,000. That's how many seats there are in heaven for people, according to the Watchtower Society. The first people to get their seats were those at Pentecost, 120. So we subtract 120 from 144,000. That now leaves us with 143,880 seats The Bible tells us in the book of Acts that 3,000 more souls were added. So we now subtract 3,000 more seats. That leaves us with 140,880 seats. The Bible then tells us that 5,000 men were added in Acts chapter 4, verse 4. That now leaves us with 135,880 seats. Now, this is where it gets good, because now we're going to use the historical records of how many Christians were put to death. Yes, the same historical records that the Watchtower Society used in these articles prior to Charles Taze Russell coming on the scene. The historical record that the Watchtower referenced in their article mentioned 4 separate accounts of individuals who had been put to death for being a Christian. Keep in mind, the society said that for 19 centuries, there was only one calling. In the articles that the society referenced, there are 4 specific examples of how many Christians were put to death. This number does not represent how many Christians there were, because some escaped. But notice what happens when you take just those 4 examples of how many Christians were put to death. 17,000, 40,000, 144,000, and 700,000. So that leaves us with a negative, yes, a negative, 765,120. All the seats are gone. According to secular history and the Watchtower teachings, by the time Charles Taze Russell came on the scene, there would have been no available seats for him or Judge Rutherford. Now, I want you to think about this. With these type of numbers, the society absolutely had no option, no choice, but to write the question from readers. The question from readers literally dismissed all of these people as being true Christians. The society wants to refer to them merely as professed Christians. Now, here's the problem. History teaches us there were 10 waves of persecution that affected the first century and early Christians. Every person who became a Christian clearly understood that the moment that he became a Christian, a follower of Christ, it was an automatic death sentence. To refer to someone as merely a professed Christian is a joke. But it goes even further, because the society, they're the ones who's using the professed Christians as examples. So we see how that when you start looking at the numbers, looking at the logic, you see how the wheels fall off the 144,000 teaching. It left the society with no choice but to come up with a second group.
We hope that you've enjoyed this video presentation, and by now you should have come to your conclusion whether or not the 144,000 teaching is a literal number or whether Charles Taze Russell was a fraud. We invite you to leave your comments below. This has been Lady C. Thank you for being in our audience.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.